And so right now we're watching Thomas Pesquet. He's already moving on to some of these get-ahead tasks, as we talked about earlier. The first one on his list is to go swap out what's known as a camera light pan and tilt assembly. It's for these external cameras on the station. He just climbed over something that looks incredibly complex. Tom, what exactly are we looking at right here, and what's it like, again, to work in that environment?
Yeah, it's as complicated as it looks. The climbing over it, it's a little bit of a challenge to not get yourself tangled up, your headlights in particular, tangled up into the cabling and the mostly cabling that you see there. That structure is a base for the arm, and to move, it can move back and forth on the station. Of course, it's what's holding the pallet right now as well, so it has a lot of good uses. But you have to be careful going over that. There's also things you can't touch, and so we have to be aware of those. So he's picking his way very carefully through there. It's not an area you want to traverse back and forth more than you need to.
And again, there's quite a few get-ahead tasks on the list. By my last count, as many as 8, and they've actually already accomplished a couple just during the regular course of this spacewalk, checking a couple.
We do that quite often, though, just to make use of both crew members as much as we can. I'm sure that they are thrilled that they're ahead of the timeline, but again, it's human nature to be thrilled by that, but we're all aware that sometimes the hardware on station doesn't cooperate, and that could put us behind, and you don't want to let that affect your work at all. So I'm sure they're happy, and happy to be chugging along with the timeline and getting things done. That's very satisfying.
And as we last checked in, they're already about 2 hours ahead of the timeline, and they actually got out of the airlock about 40 minutes early. The spacewalk started when their suits switched over to battery power at 5:22 a.m. Central, 6:22 a.m. Eastern. So really has been a day of pretty much constantly moving ahead of schedule. And again, we're looking.
This is an important part in a spacewalk. The crew can start to get tired. I don't think there's any evidence of that in this case. The crew's aware of that. All crews are. And so what we do is just try to take even more vigilance over how we feel, making sure we're not making any mistakes based on some fatigue that can start to set in at this point of a spacewalk.
Thomas, once you're complete with your activity, you can transfer the IEA PGT with the hex driver to EV1.
Copy. I'm still working on the still in my crew light bag.
One thing I'll add about where Shane is right now, he's in a foot restraint. Your feet can get cold in that. Temperature changes are not something we talk a lot about. On the night side, they probably have their glove heaters on. It's easy to start to feel a little bit chilled unless you take the time to readjust your temperature valve to reduce the amount of chilled water flowing over you. Of course, in a few minutes, it's going to switch back again and going to get hot as the sun starts to pour down on them. So if they're not readjusting their valves, some astronauts choose not to do that and not adjust their temperature, then they might get a little warm on the hot side and get chilled on the cold side.
All right, well, hopefully his feet are not getting too cold, but right now continuing to line this.
We talk about batteries, of course. They weigh about 350 pounds, about the size of a coffee table, and you can see them in the view. So not your regular D-cell batteries that we're talking about here. Essential for continuing the work on the space station, because that provides the power that you need, even though you're on the night side and the solar arrays can't directly deliver the power as it can when the sun is shining on them.
Install the hex driver onto H2, confirm one line flush, drive 16, 17 turns to torque, alpha 7 clockwise 2.
And as a reminder to me that one of the unique qualities of the space station is the largest power station ever.
Man and machine to get this upgrade completed. But as you mentioned, there are some things you need to send a human out there to do, some repairs, some installations that you need the astronauts' hands and eyes on to get accomplished.
9.4, 5.05 turns, green light, H1. Up here. Got it? I got it. And the connector is demated, TA clamps are demated. Good EMI band, no FOD on the connector.
Yeah, Shane, we copy those. We're going to go through the same choreography. Once Thomas and Shane are ready, you will swap the cap and the NZGL and then install them to the adjacent lithium-ion battery and the cap onto J4.
Let me see if I can get a read on this. Come on. Yep. You have the connector? I have the connector. Yep.
So it looks like we have the third and final adapter plate now installed. Next up, get this cable connected to the adjacent lithium-ion battery for one last checkout. And going back to something you talked about a little bit earlier, they're working out on a section fairly exposed, fairly away from the rest of the station, where you have some pretty unobstructed views at times of the Earth. Were there any moments from your previous spacewalks that stood out to you as being especially like that? And I have to ask, do you ever get a feeling of vertigo or falling or anything, because when there's just kind of nothing but you and a tether between 250 miles straight down to Earth?
That can actually kind of come into your consciousness very abruptly sometimes. It used to happen to shuttle astronauts when they would look over the lip of the payload bay of the shuttle. If all your external cues kind of point in one direction, for instance, if you look over the edge of the payload bay of the shuttle and you happen to see the Earth below you, I've heard astronauts say they suddenly got a feeling that they were way up high and wanted to grab onto something. Very thrilling couple of seconds. It's happened to me on station when an object just happened to float in the direction of the Earth, and so for a split second you get this feeling of there's still gravity and I'm about to fall down towards the Earth. But typically those things don't last for more than really a split second, just enough to kind of surprise you, get your heart rate up, and it doesn't last very long. But it's very exciting.
Well, like this.